Thanks for tuning into the Product Operations Summit. We really hope you're enjoying the event so far, as there's even more to come. All sessions are designed to be interactive and to give you the chance to engage with our panelists and speakers, so come ready to get involved with your questions and comments. For access to even more exclusive Product Ops content, check out PLA membership plans at productledalliance.com. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the next session.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Product Operations Summit. We've got a fantastic panel session up next for you on scaling product ops from 1 to N. I'm just going to introduce our moderator for the session, Chris Butler, who is the AVP and Global Head of Product Ops at Cognizant. I also know Chris for his many fantastic contributions to the PLA community and his articles as well, which I'm always grateful for. But yeah, don't forget to drop any questions you have into the chat, and our panelists will, of course, get to those. Without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Chris.
Great, thank you, and welcome everybody to this panel about scaling product ops. I'm Chris Butler, as he said, and my role at Cognizant is really to PM the PM experience as the head of product operations. But what I would love to do is, before I talk too much about myself, I would love for all of our panelists to come on. What everybody can do is, I would love for everybody to give their name, their current role, and then where did you start as far as product operations, where are you now, and then where are you going as far as numbers, just because I think getting a level set around that would be great. For me, you know, at Cognizant, we started as a team of one. We're now a team of about 1.5. So we've grown by at least 50% over the last year, which I'm really excited by. But I would love for everybody else. And then finally, you know, if you were a product operations animal, what type of product operations animal would you be? And yes, I am going to still ask that question to everybody here. For me, I would say that because I was like one product ops person for such a long time, that I'm more of a lone wolf product operations person, which is, you know, still trying to figure out all the right things to do, howling at the moon, which is mostly my manager, and then trying to stay close to the ground and make sure I understand what's going on with my team. So I would love to let's go by alphabetical order. So Antonia, I'd love to hear your name, where you're at, numbers, and then your product ops animal, please.
All right, thank you, Chris. So as you said, my name is Antonia. I started in a team of 2. So it's me and my manager, and we have been a team of 2 for a very long time. We are now a team of 4, which is very exciting for us. And we are looking to be roughly 10 to 15 people by the end of the year. So we have very big plans. And as far as animal is concerned, I apologize to the other panelists because I'm going to choose a very obvious one, but it's going to be a cat, specifically one of my cats. She sticks her head into absolutely every single bag or nook and crevice she can find. I like to think I am just as thorough when it comes to uncovering problems that our PMs and other product people have.
That's great. Thank you, and welcome to the panel. Camilla, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Camilla Gargantini, and I'm a Senior Product Operations Manager at Oyster HR. I joined the company only 4 months ago. So when I joined, the team was a lead on the department and another Senior Product Operations Manager. So I was the 3rd hire, and since then we already added 3 more, technically 2, and we just have another one starting, and we have 2 more roles I believe we're going to be filling in the next quarter. But our situation is a little bit unique in the sense that I am, out of the 5 people in the team right now, 4 of us are fully owning the knowledge base and building a knowledge base. So they are dedicated to an entire project that it's a product in itself. And I am the one doing whatever is left that we need to do in product ops. And with that being said, my animal right now, I feel like a border collie. I'm trying to herd everybody together. We are trying to figure out what we need to be doing. And the reason why I say I'm a border collie, because if you don't know about Oyster HR, a year ago, just over 14 months ago, we were a team of 17 people. This week I checked our count, we are 407. When I joined the company, we were just over 200. So in 4 months, we have added another 200 people, and we cannot keep up with our processes and ops, because there's always new sheep coming in that we're trying to herd into the right pens. So my job is a little hard today, but not that they're sheep, don't take that wrong, but it's just very hard to keep track of what's going on. It's a lot.
Yeah, I won't make any comments about wolf versus sheep in this whole thing. So Lindsay,
Awesome.
if you want to, yeah, Lindsay, if you want to go next, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay. I am a product operations manager at Twilio. Twilio has a unique product operations setup in that there is a central team, which is 6 to 10 folks on that team. And then there are a few of us that have a unique situation of being embedded into particular teams or business units, if you'd like to call it. Trying to move away from that language. But the team that I support is a product platform. I started as a single product ops manager. We had a product ops manager start Monday. Elliot, he's going to do great things. And then we have another open rec. So if anybody's looking, please come and join me. Product platform is made up of the business units or teams that support products within Twilio. So more of, if you've heard horizontal teams, core teams, similar language there. There's roughly 350 people in that group. I like to say that product is not anything without engineering. You have to hold hands with each other to do great work. So I don't say that I exclusively support product managers, but both. And that combination is roughly 70 people in my group. Animal, I'm going to go mountain goat. I'm based in Denver. There's, if anybody is in Colorado, there's an area off of I-70 that has, I think it's like Silver Springs or something, but there's always mountain goats that you can see at random, but they're just silently scaling really difficult terrain. That's kind of my product catchphrase. And that like you're constantly climbing onto the next tough challenge, which is incredible in terms of work life. Very excited to do that kind of work. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that. Tracy, definitely last but not least.
Hi, my name is Tracy. I'm the Director of Product Operations at Koros. I've been there about 6 months. I originally was at Thomson Reuters for my first role in product operations, which is a very, very large company. We had a setup just like Lindsay's, actually, where I was working with the platform team. And then eventually we grew out to having a larger enterprise team, and I worked there with the tools team. And then I came over to Koros, which is a smaller organization. It's a startup. It's really exciting. We have about 50 or so product managers, and I have a team. I started with a team of 2. I now have a team of 4, making a lot of exciting changes. For the animal, I love the mountain goat. That sounds amazing. My first thought was a capybara, and the only reason why is because a capybara, you can generally put it with any other pack of animals, and it's going to do okay. And I feel like with product operations, we work with so many different stakeholders that it's really important that you're able to work with each of those groups.
That's great. And we watch Encanto a lot in this household, and there is a capybara that makes a guest appearance in that movie as well. So I do love that animal. It's a great animal. Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome to this discussion. I think, where we'd like to get started, people are here to think about how do we actually move from a team of 1, if you are there today, up into much larger groups. And maybe that's a question for each of you here. How do you actually decide what type of scaling is right? And from the standpoint of like, what does scaling mean? Is it really about people? Like, is it just adding additional bodies to the product operations team so that they can cover more of the PM group? Or does it start to mean that, like, in the case of, say, Lindsay, moving to the idea of, say, chief of staff and covering different types of functions? Or is it something else entirely? And I would love to hear from each of you. So why don't we go back in reverse order here, and I'll start with Tracy.
For me, scale is primarily around scope. And I would say that you'll hear a lot of people say that a product manager, one of the first things they have to get really good at is saying no. And I feel like in every group that I've had, I've basically acquired some people within the organization. And one of the first things we have to do is take a look at the work that's on their plate today and say no. And so in order for us to determine how we scale, first we have to scale back. And then we say, okay, so where are the really great strategic areas that we can help? And now let's talk about scaling that out further and where we can help, and it's going to make sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect, is this idea of there's probably all these things and processes, everything that's already there that probably needs to be broken down. And even things that we do at certain points probably needs to be broken down at some point in the future, right? So how do we decide it's great? Lindsay, what do you think?
Yeah, similar, but I would choose different language, Tracy, in that it is scope, but I would also say breadth of ownership, which depending on the size of your organization or the supporting groups of your organization is going to vary. And there's a point where you get, for lack of a better phrasing, a backlog, right? And you look at the backlog and you're saying these things are being dropped. How much risk does that dropping carry? And I maybe need some assistance with that. I've had a lot of debates in the last couple months about, is it by function or is it by size of team? Which is interesting because I think it really depends on the need of the group. In my organization, there was a gap in product manager level support. Chris, you and I talked about this a little bit of like my leveling is next to an SVP, which not my leveling, but whom I enable and support is been at that level. And some things can be dropped at the team. And if you're looking for bottoms up real information, you might need partnership at that level, or maybe you need some analytics and focus in that based on the backlog that you're seeing or the gaps that you're seeing. So it's really dependent on organization, unfortunately. Not a straight answer.
You're giving me the it depends answer, and that
Yes.
is entirely appropriate for a product management product ops panel. I think that the backlog thing was interesting to me. I'm somewhat anti icebox and backlog. Like I used to go around my old office and put little post-it notes that said backlog on all the trash cans. But I think it's a really good point though that we do have like a list of problems we're trying to solve, right? Like I think to that point. So yeah, I'll try to put aside my kind of feelings about backlogs. But
Thanks,
Camila,
Chris.
yeah, thank you. Camila, what do you think?
Yeah, for me, very specific to our situation, which is, it depends on the company here, is that if anybody has ever worked at a small startup with, 10, 20 people, what you did at 10, 20 people will not work for 300, 400, and it will not work for what we are aiming to do at the end of this year. So right now, not only do we need to keep up with those changes, it's about really building the infrastructure of how a product team should operate. So we don't have that baseline defined because before it was easy for you to communicate with 20 people. And now we need to really outline what is this team about? What are the things that we need to build for the team so they can do their job? Before, the PMs were doing everything. They were doing product ops, product marketing, and now we have an entire team dedicated to that. And like you said, areas of accountability. Now they don't need to do all of that. Now there's all of these other supporting teams, and really that forming stage where people are still uncertain because it's such a fast change and they are afraid of stepping on people's toes. So managing these relationships, building relationships with the leads of the department so they understand that we need to collaborate so we can scale. And for me, it's very specific to the size of the company right now.
Yeah, that definitely adds another layer of kind of complicatedness if you're scaling not only the company itself, but also the team, right? And,
Yes.
and so how do you decide which is appropriate is sounds like a very interesting and hard problem. Yeah. Antonia, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think for us, like actually from day one, we realized 2 people weren't enough, right? Like we have roughly 50 PMs, which means we have roughly 50 product teams, and 2 people just was never enough. It was enough for us to sort of have a proof of concept that we need product ops and product ops can be helpful, but we were purely tactical. We would see an issue, we would discover it, we would solve that particular issue, and then we would move on to the next one. It was very hard to be strategic. And that was sort of one of the pointers where we saw, okay, in order to do this, long term in a more strategic way, we need more people. But it's also about breadth of scope, like Lindsay mentioned. So once we have, the sort of effectiveness down within the PMs and the products teams, now it's time to look at the entire company. Or how can we make sure that we enable everybody that has touch points with our product and product ops teams? So for us, it was those 2 aspects.
That's great. And I think maybe like adding to this discussion is really the next big question, which is how do you know that scaling is working, right? What is the value that we're creating here? How do we know that we're on the right track? What does that mean? And so actually, I'm going to randomize the order a bit using a dice roll. And so Camila, why don't you go next?
Okay, for me, it's a little bit harder to answer that because I feel that every week things are changing very quickly. So for me to even be able to say that, is it working? What we've been doing so far, I need more time to tell. But what I've noticed is that some of the work that we are doing, now people are noticing that we're here and people are coming to us and being like, hey, there's these gaps over here. So to me, it's a measure of success because people understand that there is value, and I could start being more specific, like more strategic of what areas these problems are at and how can I work with these teams to have more impact and in deciding how we're going to build this team, right? Because right now everything is very much tactical, like Antonia said. It's like, we have a problem, let's fix it. We're very much dealing with fires right now because of the speed in which we're growing. But the reason why we're bringing more people is so we can have more time to think. And I think just having that validation from other team members coming and say, yeah, there is a need for this because there is too much. It's a signal for me. Metrics are still, we still need to define. We're not there yet. We need to build some baselines to actually know when to know it's working. But one thing that I am planning to do at the end of this quarter is actually send a survey both internally to our product team and all of the teams that collaborate with product management to create a baseline, and then do that recurringly throughout the year so we can see if there was any change in that relationship and how the teams are working together, and use that to guide the next stages of building out the product and the scope.
What type of metrics are you going to be baselining?
So I don't have that yet decided, but we're looking at, like, do you trust that we're making the right decisions in product? It's about like stakeholders trusting that we're making the right decisions, that we are taking feedback and working on it promptly. It's about clarity and visibility because there's a lot of communication complexity for us right now. We are a fully distributed company and we have people in 60 different countries. So communication as an asynchronous, working asynchronously, trying to be agile with no, infrastructure base for how we work is what I'm trying to focus on.
Yeah, the trust thing is really interesting. I hadn't thought as much about trust. I've definitely been thinking about how do people feel included inside of the community of practice. But that's also another thing that I think will be, different culturally, especially if you're running a global organization. But that's really interesting to me. Tracy, why don't you go next? What do you think? Like, how do you know that your scaling is working? And then I would love to ask everybody as part of your answer, like, are there metrics that you're actually using today? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, we're still relatively new. I think a lot of it right now is qualitative. We have a lot of conversations, a lot of surveys, but and that's usually in partnership. I'll open that up too with our Agile Enterprise group, and so we've got a really great partnership there. For the things that we're starting to measure outside of that, we just had an OKR session actually with our team to talk about what are the things that we're starting to measure. And the reality is that because we're still relatively new, the organization is also in that startup function. So we're still scaling, we're still defining what those things look like. So it's also that balance of finding the right outcome metrics, and then sometimes it's an output, sometimes it's just we're establishing something as the first thing that we're doing. And trying to see some progress in those spaces, and so it'll come soon.
Do you have an OKR for product operations? I'm always interested to hear if you have an OKR for that.
We have a few. I mean, some of ours are in like enabling the organization to find roadmaps, so making sure that everybody across the organization reduce the amount of step points to get to understanding where that work is at. There's also things like embedding customer insights into the roadmap. How often are we doing discovery sessions? Obviously, brand new for us, and we're still defining how we're going to hit those.
Yeah. So, what is the goal of roadmaps inside your organization, and why is product ops involved in that?
It's mostly about visibility. So, in the past, I've been working in this as well as around. It's that partnership across the organization, and everyone saying, "Hey, we want to be able to know what's coming. We want to be prepared for that, and we want to know who to ask or where to find those things." And so a lot of times what happens is, especially as you have these growing organizations, they usually have these incredible relationships where they've always reached out to this person and that person's given them all that information. But as you start to scale, that becomes just less feasible in the long term. So how do we make it so that instead of you having to personally go ask for people to get the information that you need, that you can go to one area and find out that information, and then your follow-up could be something after that.
Yeah, I wonder if like product ops job is just to make sure that like you can find the link for something sometimes. Yeah, and Antonia, what do you think? Like, what does success of scaling look like, and what are metrics or OKRs that you use in your practice?
So as of right now, we don't actually have any specific product ops metrics. What we do track is we essentially treat every single project we do as a product, right? So how do we define success for a particular project? So we track things on a project basis, but I think in the future, something that we'll definitely look at is actually, well, are we hitting our targets? Like, are the PMs, well equipped enough that they can do their job successfully? I think that's something that sometimes almost gets overlooked, because in the end, what we're here to do is enable those people to do their best job. So I think it'll become very relevant to us very soon to see, well, are we hitting those, business targets? Are we hitting our OKRs? And how is product ops feeding into that?
Yeah, I guess this is the part that I I kind of feel, I guess I feel very strongly about, but I do worry about us being too invested in the success of the product itself rather than the people. And I find it really hard to actually discern the difference between those things, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a very hard question, and I definitely want, So Lindsay, why don't we go to you next? How do you see success in scaling, and what metrics or OKRs do you use as part of your organization?
Yeah, Chris, I love your phrasing on PMing the PM experience, because we talked about this when we all chatted before, but the article that Marty wrote about process people and the generalizations associated with that, and saying PMing the PM experience puts a different label on it than like, oh, I'm going to come in and make all of these manual changes and you have to answer to me. And like, oh, Lindsay's a process person. Watch out. She's going to add more work to us. Right. I would say it's more about the systems. And it's a systems for great people to do what they need to do. If you're filling the gap of product management and leadership in product, that's something to talk about and figure out with your leadership what that actual problem is. That's just a little side nugget, but I would say that if you are talking about a system, you ask the question of, if such and such happens to the organization, is this still going to be helpful? And if you are like, not sure, maybe not. There are some times where you have to have Band-Aids, but you should primarily be looking ahead. You are that organization that looks ahead and knows what the scale will become and what you need to answer to. Success for that, like in terms of measurement for product ops, is really hard. I agree, Chris, in that you can be 4 steps away from the success of something and try and correlate it to product operations. So one of ours would be like roadmap predictability or accuracy, which really is product management, right? But have we enabled them to get to that visibility, transparency? They predicted the right things. The lead time was reasonable, like all of those things that come with that. But you can't it's hard to put a project with that. So Antonia, we do the same thing where a project will have a measure of success that we hope results in an outcome. But I would say our primary is reading 6 steps away the success of product and how we helped. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that also kind of like makes me feel uncomfortable that we're being judged on accuracy of roadmaps when the accuracy of most roadmaps is like 0% or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so anyways, I think that's really interesting. And I think that is why it's so hard, right, to actually come up with metrics here. Like on one side, we could talk about like engagement, like in the community,
Yeah.
maybe that's one thing, but just because people are like talking to each other all the time doesn't mean they're getting anything done that's good. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's really, really hard. I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure it's not read as incentivized, right? Like I'm not incentivized because of that success. I'm not judged because of that, right? It's just the enablement part.
Yeah. Well, and how would you differentiate this? So I was reading through On Deck is like a program that also has a education kind of certification for chief of staff people. And how have you, and what basically when I read through this one article, it was very focused on kind of synchronous meeting cadence and the way that you end up doing both strategic and tactical alignment. And so how much have you seen a difference between that for chief of staff versus product operations? Because I think there's a lot the product ops can probably learn from that type of thing. But at the same time, I don't want to kind of just reduce chief of staff to just the person who figures out the meetings, because I know that there's a lot more than just that. So
yeah,
I would love to hear more.
I read that article. I saw you posted on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. So if anyone's asking which one he's referencing, check him out. But I think the operational cadences is a big part of what I do, but it's not the only part. And to your point, it's not only for chief of staff, right? But I think it's a differentiation that comes in addition to that of, again, the systems. So I actually had to write this one down because it's hard for me to get like my own brain around it sometimes. It's strategy to execution for product teams. Cadences promote the conversation of strategy. But when we start to slice work, start to get into the outcomes tied to that larger strategy outcome, right? There's subsets of work that become a part of this. That's where I feel product ops has more of that bubble, not necessarily of ownership, but of enablement, right? Allowing the product managers to affiliate outcomes with their releases that tie to strategy and a lot of the mapping. So the visibility, as Tracy mentioned, is a big part of that. That way everyone knows where things are going. But then how am I enabling things like intake, the tooling, the data to support the decision that these product managers are making, the priority framework when something comes in and we're having to shift things around, and the communication of that too. So it's a big part, but then there's all the other things that trickle off of that piece, the more execution or delivery association with the strategy.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. As far as a next major question I want to ask is, what is the right amount of product operations inside of an organization? And can there be too many? And how do you know if you have too many? I'm assuming most of us, we feel like we do not have enough, but I would love to talk about both the kind of too many and too few, and how we know that, and maybe what is the right amount. Ratios would be great, I think, for everybody to be very practical, but at the same time, I have a feeling that if I ask for a ratio from all of you, I'll get the answer, it depends. So let's talk about the nuance in that particular case. So Antonia, why don't you start this time?
I love and hate this question because it absolutely does depend. I mean, the product ops team is there to help solve problems, right? To remove barriers. And now it could be that you're a product ops person in a super effective, super efficient company that, really has been doing product right from day one, whatever that means for every different company. And 1 or 2 people for 50 PMs might be completely fine, because what you need to do there is help support, make sure that things are repeatable, make sure that everybody has access to the right information, etc., etc. But you might have 50 PMs and you may have no data whatsoever. So you need somebody for that. You may have no communication strategy. You may have senior leadership or stakeholders who have never been involved in an OKR process. So you need to do some coaching there. You might need to do some education and coaching for lower level PMs as well. So there is no right ratio, right? It honestly depends on how far away are you from the ideal that you would like to get to, and how many people do you need to support that.
Well, can't we just train a chatbot to just respond with the links to the resources that people are looking for? I feel like maybe that's a possibility. We should get on that. Anyway, I appreciate your answer about it depends. Camila, can you give me a different answer than it depends?
Yes, I can. Right now, for my case, and what I am advocating for within our company is that we have support for every product team. So if I have 10 product teams, we have 10 POMs, but then we need to look at the experience of that person. So if that product operations manager it's just the way I think about supporting, having a product designer in a team. If it's a senior person that has been doing this for a very long time and they're very efficient, they can support more teams. But if you're a junior person, you might only be able to do one. So looking at that, because I think we can't just start throwing money at the problem and hiring people, because and then it becomes a problem long term. If we just keep hiring one person for each product team, what happens when they do become mature and now there isn't as much work for you to do within that team? It's kind of like the agile coach thing. Once they become agile, what do you do with your job? And it's people's livelihoods. So I am always very, very intentional on when I have conversations about growing and even looking at the hiring process and saying, does this person have an interest to move into product management maybe in the future? Because they could support us for a little bit of time, and once they build what they needed to build there is a planning for their own career development. So I think we need to be very strategic, and at Oyster right now, there is just so much. There is no standard for communication, for road mapping, for anything, that we need a lot of people. That's why my team, there's so many, and we're hiring more. But we're having conversations on how do we scale over time, and how we move the people around depending on the needs of the company as we become more efficient at what we do.
Yeah, the fact that you're mentioning agile coaches is really interesting. I've often started, or at least started to wonder, like, how much should we including coaching as a practice within product ops, or whether that should be separate, especially like for product leaders, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, really interesting question. We probably can't get to it during this talk, but I think it's a really important one we should be thinking about. So Lindsay, why don't you speak to your point of view?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was asking for people to join my team and get the support, I met with a eng leader, and his statement was, well, if you do your job well, you work your way out of a job. And my rebuttal to that was, that's like saying an architect works their way out of a job. Like, yeah,
there's a done state for this thing that we've built, and we're done. We can just
yeah, that doesn't it like that's not what operations is, right? Like, let's talk through that and like change whatever thought process is happening there. But it's interesting hearing from engineering leaders what the perspective is in operations, just generalizations and things. But when I posed that to him, he was like, oh, so I just like took out all of the variability of people and change management, and as we scale, what the needs arise. So I will say it depends, but I think I mentioned before, it's also on what your model looks like. Is it scale to people, or is it scale to function? So if I were to say to people, I think an ideal ratio would be 10 PMs to 1 prod ops manager at a minimum, I would say. That's pretty difficult to manage. But if it's by function, you can think of it as like an analytics focus, a GTM interlock / feedback / customer focus, road mapping, tooling focus, coaching, and then a leader. So I'd say function, I'd say like 5. But again, it depends on what you're solving for. Are you solving for the PM, or are you solving for an organization and the tooling and that leveling? Yeah.
Thank you. And Tracy, what do you think?
Yeah, I love Lindsay's response. There's a lot of that just really supports what it is that you're building for. What I find is I usually tell my team good work is the reward for good work is more work, right? Everyone's heard that before. And so what happens is, as your product operation team starts getting a lot of great work done, people start handing you more work. And the trick I get is that at some point, everyone is resource strapped and they start looking for somewhere to set their overflow. And what happens is they see this team of very efficient people that are getting things done, and they say, hey, you could help out in this area. We can give you more headcount so that y'all can continue to grow in this. But I think the important thing for us is that if we start becoming kind of a Band-Aid for the resourcing and the rest of the organization, are we really helping them? And that's where I get concerned about making sure that our size really helps to be the most effective with our teams.
Yeah, at what point are we doing the bullshit work of product managers rather than letting them actually do the work themselves? I think that's a really great question. As far as the next thing, like, let's say that we do need to scale in some way. How do all of you make the case? And this is actually a question from Waichu in the chat. But how do you make the case for this, especially against other types of like resourcing that may happen? Like, we could hire another engineer, or we could hire another customer support person, or something like that. Like, how do you make that case for it? And let's start with Lindsay. Why don't you start this time?
The ever-going battle. Because I do hear that, right? It's like, well, we could add some more engineering resources to, focus on delivery. I just spoke about the debate that I had with the engineering leader on this, but I would add another case that I've used before is about specific challenges and raising them and say, like, who is the owner of these things? So something we were struggling with was we spent a lot of time in discovery. Engineering wasn't included, which created some, siloing of work and lots of cultural things that come from that. But then when it came to execution, our stakeholders are already asking, when am I going to get this, right? They've been already waiting for such a long time, because the discovery process, either wasn't efficient or we're not prioritizing the right things. In our remote world, right, we have so many meetings and things that you have to be very diligent about the discovery that you do, even in a priority order. So in speaking with a leader, this is a stakeholder issue. We're not delivering on our commitments because of X reason. Who is going in and looking at this process and enabling product managers to do a better prioritization process, artifact development, templates, all of these things, and making that progress visible for our stakeholders as well. Back to Tracy's point on transparency. That's a specific case, but I think it's really identifying the problem, just like it is for a product manager. What's the problem I'm looking to solve? And saying, who owns the solution of this? And if it's a question mark, and you know in your breadth of ownership, as we mentioned before, as a products manager, that you can go and facilitate and enable teams to do that, you make that case on specific examples. Otherwise, it's fairly difficult.
Great. And Camilla, what do you think?
Yeah, I pretty much believe in everything that Lindsay just said. And for me, more specifically, I take the approach of being the product manager, right, for the product team. And I'm just having a lot of conversations. So I'm making a case by finding opportunities for myself to insert myself right now, because I'm in discovery mode. What are really the problems that we are having in the product team? And as I start picking up on signals, so again, we are a fully distributed company, and asynchronous meetings is what we are aiming for. But a lot of the times people default for a quick, meeting on the call, and then suddenly there's schedule problems. And I started noticing this pattern. And in order for me I didn't come up and say there is a problem. I decided, you know what, let's do some research here. Let's take some discovery approaches. And I sent a very quick, simple survey to understand how much time people were spending in meetings from the entire product team, just to give me something to grab onto so I can move forward, because I didn't want to make the assumption that there was a problem, because it might be very localized. It might be just one product team that it's defaulting to synchronous communication, and that's not a comprehensive problem within the team. But the data that came from that survey was pretty interesting, that people that you would expect to be participating more in synchronous meetings weren't, where leaders were in a lot of the product team meetings, and we're just like, wait a second, there's something here. So we're digging it further. And just by doing that, people are starting paying attention. And again, people are coming to me and now being like, hey, Camilla, I saw that data. Can we actually drill it down to my specific team so I can figure out how to work with that? And again, that to me is a signal that we're doing something that it's working. But I think we just need to take that discovery approach. We can't just act on a gut feeling. We need to do a little bit more of a discovery process and have something to back whatever decision we need to make next.
Yeah, and so the wins are something that, like, this is a win that you've identified a real problem within the PM team. And I definitely think that, like, time management in general is something that just product managers don't seem to do a good job of. And I think it's partially because of environment, right? Like, we have to be in almost every single meeting for some reason. And then when do you have time to actually do the deep work that you're supposed to do? And so that, I think, starting to gather those wins of like, hey, we discovered this thing that is really like impactful for us, allows you to make that case. Right.
Sure.
So I definitely get that. Tracy, what do you think? Like, how do you make the argument for actually scaling your team? And kind of how do you do that in comparison to other teams?
I think it's similar. Lindsay kind of talked about this before around being 6 steps ahead of things. So when you're looking at the organization and you're saying, where do we think that we're going to see some bumps in the road? And we want to make sure that we're preparing for that. I think making sure that you're on top of that. I've actually had where I've listed one role, and within a week had some more information come in that made me realize that was not the right role, pulled the role, put a different role out and said, that's the one that we're hiring for now. But it is about trying to make sure that you're doing whatever you can to make it an easier process, reduce the friction across the organization, and find the right spot.
Great. And Antonia, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very privileged that I'm in an organization that really, really values product ops. So for us, it wasn't even a conversation. But when we look at,
they just gave you a blank check and said, hire as many product ops as you wanted.
Well, I mean, look, we were a collection of brands that essentially up until a year ago were barely speaking to each other. For us, product ops is really a transformation topic. And it's really, how do we learn to be efficient with the resources that we have? And if you look at what a product ops manager can do for the whole company, as opposed to, one more engineer or one more even engineering lead, it's kind of no contest for us.
All right. Well, I won't tell your engineering team that you said this. It's not
Please don't.
or anything. Yeah, I think a question that we just got from a little bit earlier from the chat was from Pam about how do you really elevate the ops work, and I think this is related to scaling in the sense, is part of how you know that you need to, or I'm not going to ask a yes or no question, but like, how do you balance this reactive versus proactive work, right? And how much does that have to do with scaling of the team? And so I'd love to hear more about that. Tracy, why don't we start with you this time?
Yeah, it's tough. I was actually just talking.
Do you have a ratio? Do you have like a ratio of proactive to reactive that you think is ideal for your team?
Ooh, I think it depends on the level of your maturity. So I think as you start out, it depends. When you start out, so I consider things to be kind of like a leaky roof, right? Are you putting more buckets to catch the water, or are you trying to go fix the roof? So we have to find the right balance of what are we doing to keep things going while we're also trying to make those other changes. And so sometimes it's a combination of the two, but in the beginning, I think it's a lot of reactive while you determine how you can be more proactive.
Yeah, so like smaller things up front to be able to build some inertia and then digging your way out to proactive work in some way. Yeah,
exactly. And I do think that just like anybody else in an agile group, you have a little bit of iterative delivery in the things that you do. And so just having people know that it's going to be coming in phases.
Yeah, interesting. Antonia, what do you think?
So we've actually introduced quite a few really group-wide processes and ceremonies, especially in the past year. And something we've done there is really that iterative approach, like Tracy said. So in the beginning, for example, for us, it was a lot of manual work to have one of these big ceremonies as a product ops team. And now we're operationalizing it, right? So now we're getting better and better. It's getting smoother and smoother. And I think for us, that's how we started. We started with something very reactive. Okay, this is a problem. People don't know what other teams are doing. And now it's really kind of become the heartbeat of the organization. Okay, this happens every 2 months. And every 2 months, everybody is involved. And now we're just getting better and better at making that easy. So I think that's how we've transitioned.
Yeah, how have you, when it comes to the cadence of these types of things, maybe just really quick, like really briefly, like how have you thought about how much change is too much change versus too little change, right, and how people adopt those types of things?
God, I think this is really something that you can't get around speaking to folk, right? Like I'm myself an individual contributor. I can also feel, how if the company's changing and I feel uncomfortable and there's too many changes, but it's really all about speaking to PMs. And you'll notice it because PMs are very outspoken people in general, and they'll tell you this is too much or I can't do this. So I think it's really just having that level of empathy where you think about as well, like, how would I feel in this situation? If everything changed tomorrow as a PM, how would I feel?
Yep, exactly. That's great. Lindsay, what do you think about proactive versus reactive in scaling?
Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like there's another category of maintenance, right? Like we operate. So there's a portion of your time that's for operations. And then I think this is
product ops, basically.
Keeping things moving, right? The maintenance aspect of things versus like when I hear proactive versus reactive, it's like, what programs do we pick up? And then there's a debate of like, are programs owned by operations and that whole argument. I would say there are some that are, if it applies to the scope. But I would go back to Camilla's point before of you're doing discovery on work, you're identifying impact and value, and then you stack rank those things against each other. So the of course, classic, it depends, but like it's going to shift based on the value of a particular line of work. I would say ideally, because Chris, I feel like I want to give you a ratio. I would say like 20% of your time is on the maintenance, right? Because those things are moving. You're just reflecting, which in some ways could be proactive. You're thinking about changes and improvements and the agility part of it. And then reactive, I'd say another 20. And then the rest But I would caveat that with, do you have the support to think strategically? I'm going to bring up the backlog, Chris. If strategy's on your backlog, red flag, right? Like we're spending too much time on reactive. How are we filling that? Who owns that? And like making sure it's very clear as to who does what. And then you can scale with an additional person or distributing ownership, etc.
Yeah, and this is maybe like an interesting analogy to time management, right? Is if you do not block off enough of your calendar to deal with reactive work, you can't deal with reactive work, right? And it feels like a catch-22.
Yeah, looking out the window time, as they call it. Yeah, just as important.
Yeah, that's really cool. Camilla, what do you think?
Yeah, before Lindsay added her part and talked about the maintenance work, my ratio was right now we are 80% reactive, 20% strategic and proactive, hopefully looking into the future. And ideally, I would like to flip that, where we are 80% strategic and 20% reactive. I believe that to do work, any kind of work, strategic or tactical, most of the time you have to spend a good chunk of time thinking about what you need to do, and then doing the actual work sometimes takes a lot less time. The problem is that we convolute the two together, right? Because there is doing in the thinking of what to do. So one thing that was very obvious to me when I joined is that the role I interviewed for, the mandate was to figure out how to close the feedback loop. But within 4 weeks being here and me analyzing what was going on in the company, I was like, there is no way I can jump into the feedback project if I don't address these infrastructure problems of how we are running the product team, right? On defining how we work together and how we roadmap, how we plan. And then I still needed to do the feedback loop. So I decided to tone down the scope of that project so I could launch that, but still do some strategic thinking on organizing the product ops team. But then now I have the maintenance of that feedback process that I launched. And then I'm stretched so thin, right? Because I'm trying to do 3 different really big chunks of things that are very important for my team, where the other product ops people in my team are focused in an entire project of their own. So that's why we're hiring or expanding, because we were never strategic in the way that we hired and assigned those areas of responsibility to think about, 20% of your time should be on maintenance of this thing that you're going to build. And that's something that I think we need to be very intentional. It's like, if you're building a program, a project, a product, who maintains it once it's done? Does the ownership stay with you, and how does your role evolve from there?
Yeah, maintenance is been popping up more and more places as we like Stuart Brand, who wrote the book How Buildings Learn, is writing a book right now about maintenance, and this covers things from like open source projects to like boating to everything. And maintenance is an incredibly important, impactful aspect of just like once you've built something. And there's even a group called the Maintainers, which is basically about social research into the idea of maintenance. And so I think it's a really, really great point. I do have a question here. Like, let's say that we've scaled successfully, and we know that we're scaling successfully. Elisheba, they asked basically, how do you go about telling the impact of product ops as a story, right? What's the narrative that we start to tell internally that allows us to now continue to grow or scale, continue to be seen as like a valuable component, if we are, right? Like I assume we are, but like if we are. Yeah, I guess, Lindsay, why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, sure. I think measuring product ops is really difficult, and I'm actually looking forward to that session. But what's the
story that you tell like your management about why product ops is like valuable in this case?
Yeah, it usually comes from qualitative feedback. And this is not me being egotistical, but when you enable people well, they will be very excited that you're helping them, and they will openly give that feedback. I think that's primarily also why I made the case for problems, right? To get some help. But then it was very clear that I was providing a service that everyone needed and appreciates. And capturing the stories from the people that you help can be something you can do, but also the allyship that you have with the people that you work with. When you build those relationships well, they will speak on your behalf, right? I think for me in my work career in general, that's been the most important thing of telling a story of impact, followed by however you can quantify it. So a bit of a soft answer, but that's for me, that's important.
I'm a big fan of like qualitative user research, and so I think the idea of how do you collect, either like research nuggets about that, I think to be able to turn into reports, like it basically is research in your community, right? That's really what you're trying to go for. So I don't think I believe a lot in qualitative research as well. So that's great. Tracy, what do you think?
Qualitative is great. I think there's different ways to measure those things. I think I've already mentioned I'm a big fan of OKRs. I come from just a long OKR background, and some of that, like I said, is qualitative, some is quantitative, and some is looking back at the organization to see where you're supporting them. A lot of the times when you hear pain points, there's not something that you're going to do to maybe necessarily directly address that pain point. I think it's more of kind of a leading indicator to the pain point getting solved. So what can you do to help move that forward or help make that a little bit simpler for folks to solve?
Right. And Camilla, what do you think?
I actually thought, as Lindsay was talking, I thought about my personal story on why I moved to product operations. And I was a product manager before, and I burned out for my past 3 jobs very badly. And I kept thinking, I was like, there's so much expectation on the plates of product managers. There is this weight that we carry that we need to have the answers for everybody, but nobody really has the backs of the product managers. And I was just like, we need to solve this. There is a burnout problem in the industry of product management. And I was just like, how can I have a positive impact so people are not going through what I had to go through as a PM, a single PM in an early stage startup? Because I feel like we're burning out an entire generation of people. And product operations for me was that. And the way I tell that story, I became the person that evangelizes that thinking of that there has to be a group of people there looking after the PMs and the product team so they can do their job. And when I share that, I think there's a lot of educating that I have to do. I get people on LinkedIn asking me what product ops is, and people are my job that I have to constantly, I have a script already, but I think that personal story helps elevate within product because they know that I have that context. I was in their shoes before. And because I worked at small teams before I had to do product marketing, I have a design background a little bit. So like I love engineering. I built relationships with all of these people that they helped me elevate product ops by me sharing that personal story, because at the end of the day, it's about the people. And my goal is to make sure that the product team comes to work and they don't dread every day because they don't have the tools or the processes or the systems to do their job. And that's what I'm trying here. So it's really about a storytelling approach for me, because like I said, it is about the people.
Yeah, and I think maybe this gets at like what Marty Kagan is talking about as far as his concern about just, product ops being another PMO is probably related to over focus on process rather than the people themselves, right? And it gets tough too because it's about individual experience, but it's also about the way the community works together. And those are 2 very different frames that we need to toggle between all the time, right? As product ops people. So that's really interesting. Yeah, Antonia, what do you think?
I mean, how do you tell a story of a product, right? I don't actually think product ops is all that different from a product. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we don't really have metrics for our product ops function in general, but for projects. So, for example, we have NPS, right? We have user interviews, we do user research, but we also look at things like the quality of a certain template has gone up, for example. We can get a certain feeling also from the product leadership where people are saying, actually, I need to intervene less. There is already a base level of understanding, of coaching that's already there. So our key results are better defined. But for us, really, it's the same thing. Like how do you measure a product? How do you tell the story of a product, right? We have an internal tool, and people ask me, well, how do you measure the impact of this internal tool? It's a website. It's like, well, how do you measure engagement on any other website? It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and maybe this points at kind of a gap in tools that are actually there, which is we do have things where we can measure behavioral like pipelines or outcomes that happen inside of a website, because there's lots of tools that have been doing this for the last 20 years or something like that, right? But when was the last time that someone, like we're a Microsoft shop at Cognizant, so the SharePoint analysis of like document access kind of leaves something to be desired. Right? And same thing with all of these other tools that we have, like maybe Slack has something when it comes to like engagement, right? But what you end up seeing is like actually a lot of the engagement happens in private channels rather than in public ones, right? And so I don't know, there's just like something there that's missing, it seems, about how do you do a better job of just like understanding the way that people are engaging, the behavior of that. You won't get at the why, but you'll get at the behavior at least, right?
So how do you measure change management, right? I think it's a very similar topic.
Well, usually for consultants, it's by the hour, because that's how you get paid. So, but anyways, I know that we're almost out of time right now. I would love to hear any kind of parting thoughts from everybody. And Antonia, why don't you lead us off here?
Oh, goodness. Where to start? I think I love that there's more and more product ops people and product ops resources. And now it's really the next level is really how we scale, right? So I think now that a lot of us have been teams of one for a while, now the next level is how do we measure? And I think we don't have the right answer, right? It's not even just because it depends a lot of the time, but a lot of the time it's because we haven't done it before. So I think actually having this panel is super educational for me as well. So thank you everybody. I was super happy to be here.
I mean, that's an exciting part of being part of product operations, is that we are figuring things out as we do them, right? And I think that's really amazing too. Camilla, what do you think?
Yeah, I back to what I was saying. There's a lot of education that is happening, and I think it's going to continue on. And there is a lot of debate about what it should be and what it shouldn't. And I just wanted to continue to be a voice and help empower that conversation, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions and lack of understanding and debates in the industry. So I just want to keep focus on that, and hopefully we can drive change in the right direction, even though I don't know what that is, because we are kind of just jumping in and figuring it out as we go. But I think that's part of why I love ops, because we get to be product managers in a more I guess systematic way and bring some order to the chaos. So
so maybe the product management as an entire field can thank product operations for actually bringing some meaning to their lives. I
hope so.
Great. Tracy, why don't you go next?
I think the one thing that I would share is just across each organization, this is my third time basically working within a product operations group and deciding, with the teams, what does that look like? And it's looked a little different every time. And so I think it's important to understand that you're going into a new situation with new systems, new people, new needs. And so you're going to be looking at that, and you're going to be trying to find the best fit for that organization. So that's the one thing that I would really stress on is listen to the people, talk to them, make your recommendation based on what their needs are.
Great. And Lindsay, why don't you end with your final thought?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for everybody for joining. First off, it is ever learning. I'm really excited about the future of product operations in general and in various industries. I think the growth is going to be incredible. There is a session following this. I'm going to put a little nugget for a lovely woman who works at Segment to have the debate of program management versus product operations and project management. So join that session. I'm also going to post in the chat a open position at Twilio. So if you're interested in being a prod ops manager and joining some chaos and making order out of it, Camilla, come on, join us. It'll be great. And find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm always happy to network with people and chat about product ops. If you can't tell, I love it. I think it's so much fun. And I'm happy to continue to learn from all of you. So.
That's great. I didn't know we were going to be poaching each other in this particular session, but I do want everybody to post their job opportunities right now. I know everybody on this panel is hiring. So please do that. And thank you so much to all four of you. It was a really great experience, great answers. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure I've seen a lot of great things in the chat about how much everybody enjoyed this and really got some insight from this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much to each of you. Yeah, what an absolutely great session. Wonderful insights, very inspiring, and lots of love in the chat, as you can see. And yeah, obviously, please do feel free to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn. I've linked out their LinkedIn page in the chat as well. And you can also continue the convo on our Slack community. I'll put a little link there too. But yeah, that's flown by. Thank you so much to each of you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
See you in the next one. Thanks for attending, everyone.